Fala galera, tudo bem? Como é que vocês estão? Eu sou o Eraldo Agostinho e antes de começar essa entrevista, você já vai aí comentando, curtindo, compartilhando e se inscrevendo no canal YouTube e no Instagram, Agostinho's Music. Galera, não se esqueça de ver as aulas imperdíveis do Dire Straits aqui, ó. Nós temos muitas aulas legais. Hoje com o grande Joop de Korte, produtor, técnico e músico do Dire Straits. Fica comigo! Joop, como foi o seu primeiro contato com a música, o seu início?
My first contact with music was really in the village where I grew up in Holland. I became part of the drum corps, first playing a snare drum, and then with the fanfare, which was a large brass band. And I played percussion, and I played snare drum for that sometimes, depending on what was needed. And that's kind of how I started, and then I got invited by a professional, somebody, to help out doing percussion for a symphony orchestra in Venlo in Holland for a little while. And I played in a little Humpapa band, playing this kind of German Egerländer music for the carnival and stuff like that, you know, and we would play. It was all amateur, of course, and you know, we would play one tune and we'd get one of those little beers that they serve in Holland. So that's kind of how it started, music as such. But my first contact with working with bands, when I was probably about 20 or so, I played drums in a little band, which was the band Deirdre in Holland. It was just a little folk rock type band, and so that was that. But I started working in London when I had moved there in the 70s. I started working as a stagehand for loading in and out shows, such as I remember the first one I did was Blue Oyster Cult, and you know, I did a bunch of different ones, Queen and what have you. And then one day I saw the band Squeeze in Holland, and I was in a club, and this must have been about 76 or so, and I was watching the drummer, Gilson Levers, who was a fantastic drummer. I watched him all night. And at the end of the night, instead of going to the dressing room, the drummer, Gilson, jumped off the stage, came to my table, gave me a pair of drumsticks, and he says, "Go." He didn't even know if I could really play or if I spoke English at all, but you know, him giving me a pair of drumsticks and saying "go" was good enough. So I went up there and bashed on his drums a little bit. They were fantastic drums, Ludwig Octopus he had, and that's how that kind of started. We got to talking afterwards. We became friends, and not long after that, they offered me a job taking care of them on the road.
Muitos fãs conheceram o Dire Straits através do disco Alchemy, ao vivo, um clássico. Ao ler os créditos, aparece o nome Joop de Korte. Por que você nunca apareceu ao vivo?
Alchemy was one of these things that came about at the end of a tour. You know, there's often live recordings that get done on tour, and they don't always become albums, but these recordings did become an album that was quite successful, double album called Alchemy, and because I played on it, I played percussion on it, my name appeared on the record. Now, most people never saw me because I was more or less hidden behind the amp wall on stage left. And the reason for that was I was really part of the crew to start out with. And so I had other functions to do. I was drum tech. I was, on occasion, I've been production manager, stage manager. I used to take care of the set as well on one tour. It was a lot of different hats to wear. And so I was almost never on the front of the stage. Later on, after Alchemy, on later tours on Brothers in Arms, for instance, I would come out at the end of the night during going home, and I would just play some tambourine or something on the outro, and that's how that worked.
Cara, você pode explicar exatamente qual era a sua função na banda durante as turnês?
So, the first time I worked with Dire Straits was I was actually working for the opening act, which was the Ian Gom Band in the US in '79 for the Communique tour. And, you know, in order to gain some time for my band, I was helping the Dire Straits guys out, taking care of their drum kit, because they really didn't have anybody that knew anything about drums. So, you know, I started doing it so that I would gain time. Now, after a few days, you know, Pick came up to me, Pick Withers, and he said, "Oh, you the guy that's been messing around with my drums?" And I go, "Yeah, is there a problem?" And he says, No. He says, "I love it. They've never looked better. They've never sounded better. It's all good. Keep on doing it." So I did that for the rest of the tour. And then at the end, he said, "Well, what are you doing after this?" And I said, "Well, I'm waiting for the phone to ring. So, you know, when we get done with our tour, I just have 2 shows to do in New York, and then I'm going home." So he goes, "Oh, well, we're going on with the Communicate tour. We got Europe to do and some UK shows, and I'd love for you to come with us." So that's how it started. And, you know, that's also when it started that Pick said to me, "Oh, you know, I got this one song where claves are hit, and they're kind of important. And so could you just play them? You don't even need a microphone because they carry so well that they'll be picked up through the overhead microphones on my drum kit, because you're sitting right next to me anyway, and that'll work just great." And I'm like, okay, so that's how that started. I don't think the band even knew, really, the other guys, and it wasn't until later that I actually officially got invited by Mark to play on virtually every song. But you know, I did a bunch of different things. You know, on the Communicate tour, it was just simple drum teching and a tiny little bit of percussion. And then on the Communicate tour, on the Making Movies tour, they asked me to be in charge of the crew and be, production manager, stage manager, drum tech, because pick was, my main focus in a way. And so they wanted me to play percussion too, of course. And, that's what I did. It was a lot of work on that tour. Then on the next tour, they actually hired 5 people to do what I used to do by myself. They hired Pizzo as a stage manager. They went through a succession of different production managers. They hired a set guy. It became a somewhat bigger production, but not that much bigger than making movies, really. But my job became a lot simpler at that point.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please welcome to the stage, Dire Straits!
Além de percussionista, você também apresentava os shows do Dire Straits. Inclusive a voz no Alchemy e apresentação é sua. Quem teve essa ideia e como foi esse momento para você?
So, once I started playing percussion, I had a setup I had a pair of congas and I had various handheld instruments like tambourines and shakers and cabasas and, little bells and cowbells and what have you. So I had a microphone set up there and with a little mixer that I figured out, what to bring up at what time. And I was also controlling the electronic drum sounds from back there. And so I had the microphone there, and so as I would bring up the band onto the stage, I would just run out behind the amp wall and introduce the band on my microphone. It was at a very specific time during the intro music, and it stayed on the record, obviously, because it was part of the show. And I did that for God knows how long.
Joop, você esteve presente no começo da banda, mas só começou a trabalhar com ele anos depois. Pode falar sobre isso?
Yes, I had actually seen Dire Straits once without it meaning much to me. I was there the very first time that they played. They played as one of the probably 3 or 4 bands in Deptford at a housing estate, and everybody in there was actually associated with the area of Deptford, Blackheath, Greenwich, that sort of part of South London. And so Dire Straits, they lived right there in that apartment building, so they got to play. But I was there with the main band. I was there with Squeeze.
Pode comentar sobre a turnê Communique?
The Communique tour was my first American tour. I'd been offered other tours before, and then at the last moment they didn't happen or whatever. And so I was very excited to be going to the US and doing a big tour, opening up for an established band at that point, and playing reasonably large venues. And so it was fun. We were traveling on sleeper buses, which is a whole different life. And so I didn't know anything about the US and touring, and it's all it's very different from touring in Europe. A lot of the venues are union venues, and they have different rules and regulations that just don't exist in Europe. And of course, everybody speaks English all the time, so that's very different for me too. Because in Europe, of course, you end up with stagehands speaking a different language every couple of days.
Como foi a experiência de trabalhar com o incrível Pick Withers?
Working with Pick was very special for me because Pick is a true artist. He speaks his own language with his drums. It's really something that not everybody knows how to do. There's a lot of good drummers out there, that can hold a rhythm pattern down and be very functional within a band. But there are few that make the drums talk the way Pick always did. It's just very subtle and very precise, but without becoming clinical ever. It always feels very organic. So for me, I loved watching him play every night, and that was just a good bonus for me.
Em que momento o Mark Knopfler descobriu que você tocava e resolveu botar você para tocar ao vivo?
Well, one time, I guess it was in the US, but I'm not quite sure. I think it was in the US, yes. I was playing Pick's drums to tune them and to make sure that everything sounded good in the monitors and in the front of house. I had this routine where I would work with the two sound engineers to make everything as good as possible, because it's a very it's a very precise thing. There are a lot of different tuning lugs on each drum, and only one of them needs to be out for the sound to become not as good as it could be. And so we worked on that, and it became kind of a known thing that Pick's drums always sounded pretty damn good. Anyway, so one day I'm doing that, and Mark and the rest of the band walked in, and Mark comes up to me and he goes, "Oh, I didn't know you could play." And I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit." And he says, "Can you play percussion as well?" So I said, yeah, I guess so. Why? And he goes, "Well, on the album there's a bunch of things that are not being played because we did them as overdubs in the studio. Pick did most of it himself. And, I'd love to hear it because I miss it." So I said, "Okay." He says, "Well, just go and buy yourself whatever it is that you might need and set up whatever you need." And he says, "You're not really in the band, you understand. You're still part of the crew, but, have a word with the manager. He'll figure something out with you, and then, please do all this stuff." So that's how that started, and I started just playing the things that were on the records. And then, of course, as the music progressed, there were different segues being built, and there was different... And eventually, it became like, I was just playing on every song, and I would discuss with Mark what he wanted to hear, and I would play it. That's basically how that went.
Pode comentar sobre o icônico show Alchemy?
The Alchemy shows, as such, the recordings of it, we were in Hammersmith Odeon, and it was the very end of the Love Over Gold tour. And so at the end of a tour, you're kind of looking forward to some time off, but you're also a very well-oiled machine. You've been playing like the same show, hundreds of times in rehearsals and in concert and in sound checks and all of that. And all these songs are completely part of you at that point in time. So it was a good time to be doing a live album, and it worked out just fine. At that point, it was a different band, obviously, from the one that had done the Communique tour, and then a different one also from the Making Movies tour. And the band at that point worked very well together, and we ended up doing those shows, and then it was also filmed, of course, video. And what a lot of people don't know is that the recording for the album was kept exactly the way it was taped. There was no overdubs done, nothing fancy added, nothing like that. But in the video, we realized that there wasn't enough close-ups of everybody. And so we set up everything in a sound studio somewhere and played the tapes and mimed to that. So some of the close-ups you see were actually recorded live, and others were added out of that footage. And the funny thing was that, the T-shirt that Mark was wearing with the arrows on it, he had thrown it away. So somebody had to go out and buy a white T-shirt, and then with black gaffer tape, they made these arrows on it so that we would have the continuity of the tape, of the visual images of what was going on.
Como você lidava com várias funções no palco?
The workload of doing too many jobs all at the same time is very stressful. The Making Movies tour was a tour where, the band didn't really know for sure yet whether they were going to become a big, huge band, which they did become, or if that was going to be the end of them. I mean, so many bands have a successful first album, then they follow it up with a second one, which then automatically gets enough attention, but that might be really the end of it, because if the third album isn't special and doesn't catch anybody's attention, then it's over. So they didn't want to spend a great deal of money, and so and they didn't want to waste too much time on the road, either with too many days off and stuff. So we had a lot of work, a lot of back-to-back shows, and not all luxury. When we started out doing the Making Movies tour in the U.S., the crew, we were driving ourselves and getting like very early morning flights and stuff like that. And so it was, we had many sleepless nights, I can tell you that. And with doing so many jobs at the same time, it became very stressful. I was glad when the tour was over at the end, because it had just been too much for all of us, really, in a way, but especially for me, because I was doing too many things.
Na versão de Tunnel of Love, da turnê Make Movies, Mark Knopfler começava o show tocando teclado junto com Alan Clark. Um momento, Alan Clark sai e uma mão mantém o teclado. Era você?
No, this is, it's a common misconception that I did keyboards as well. We had a keyboard tech on the Making Movies tour, which was Ron Eve, who later started taking care of Mark's guitars for the next tour. But at that point, he was doing the keyboards, and when the intro got played to Tunnel of Love, Mark would come up on the riser and play that intro, but he had to get off the riser and to the front of the stage to start playing guitar. And so the last chord had to be held down by somebody else. So Ron Eve would slide in, and this little hand would kind of appear on the keyboards, and you can see that in videos that were taken back then.
Qual foi o maior desafio da turnê Make Movies, que foi muito exigente?
Well, one of the biggest challenges on the Making Movies tour was when we did shows in Italy. We played these giant stadiums that we weren't used to doing. We had to bring in a whole bunch of extra sound equipment and extra crew and stuff like that. And that was a big challenge. But you know, other than that, it was just a tour, same as any other tour, where you're doing back-to-back shows and traveling overnight and sleeping on a bus, and that's just how it goes. And you're maybe on tour in Europe for 6 weeks, and then you come home for a week or so, and you go back out to the US or to Japan or Australia or wherever. So that's how these things go, and between rehearsals and production rehearsals and then the tour and maybe some TV stuff, you end up, you know, it's like a year's work.
Você quase ficou de fora da turnê Love Over Gold. Como foi ser chamado de volta pelo Mark Knopfler?
So, what happened after the Making Movies tour was everybody took a little break, and then the band went in the studio to record Making Movies in New York, and I didn't need to be there for that, and I'm not sure if they even took anybody at that point. Maybe they took Pete Brewers, who was the guitar tech. They probably took him just to take care of the guitars for Mark and the rest of the boys. But I didn't need to be there. Pick would work with the producers and the technicians there. They had a great engineer, and they would spend a great deal of time working on getting the right drum sounds for Pick. So, you know, and they didn't really need me for that. But then when Pick left after the recording of Love Over Gold, he didn't want to do the tour, and so they got Terry Williams on board, and which was a very different thing. Anyway, I mean, not at all the same kind of player as Pick Withers, but I mean, he brought amazing energy to the band. Anyway, he had his own tech that he was going to bring, I'm sure, and so they didn't figure on needing me for the tour. But then when the rehearsal started, Mark says, "Where's Joop?" Well, he's not doing the tour. We got a different drummer, different drum tech, and he said, "No, I don't think that's how that works, because he plays in the band too. So I was actually on tour in Ireland with the Louis Belson Big Band, legendary drummer that I was working for at that time. And, I got a phone call from the management of Dire Straits saying, hey, can you do the tour and can you be here like tomorrow? I'm like, no, I got to finish the tour with Louis. And as soon as I'm done with that, it was the end of the tour anyway. There was like another week to go or so. And so then I showed up at London rehearsals and, started working on the songs. And that's when I met Terry the first time. And, I figured out how to play the new songs and remembered the old ones. And we took it from there.
Na sua opinião, o que tornou essa fase da banda tão especial, já que as músicas ficaram mais longas e mais trabalhadas?
When Alan Clark joined the band for making movies, obviously it brought a whole different dynamic to the sound. There was a lot more possibilities, and Mark was very excited about it. I think I was actually picked that had insisted on getting a keyboard player and talking Mark into it. That would be a good thing. But obviously they had used some keyboards on the albums, and so it was a natural thing to happen. And Clarky showed up, and he was fantastic, of course, great keyboard player. And Mark was so excited that he started adapting all the songs to be able to incorporate keyboards, and we started building on segues and stuff like that. And we, in the beginning of the tour, every sound check, they were working on building the song Telegraph Road. It had started just like Mark writing some stuff, and they would work on it on the bus, and they would work on it in wherever they could, but it was mainly in the sound checks that it really came together. And so it was really exciting to be part of that and watching this whole thing grow so organically. It was probably the most naturally come together tune they ever did, I would say.
A turnê do álbum Brothers in Arms foi gigantesca. Como foi viver o auge do Dire Straits por dentro?
The Brothers in Arms tour was really another progression from where the band had gone over the years. It was again a different configuration of people that were in the band, and it was a tour that became absolutely massive because the record was just the right record for that time. In '85, it was the biggest thing in the world, that record. It was number one everywhere. And so it was really fun because all the shows were sold out. No matter what size venue we would play, it would be sold out. Now, the band liked to play arenas, much more so than stadiums. They didn't really enjoy super large crowds. And so we would, like for instance, we finished the tour in Australia, and Australia and New Zealand together at the time had something like 14 million people living there. We sold them almost 1 million tickets. It was insane. People came to multiple shows, and they could, because like in Sydney, for instance, we would play the same venue, the entertainment center. We played it 21 nights and sold it out, and we could have done more, but this is how it worked out, and it was just really fun. Everywhere we went, there was people inviting us to do stuff. We were coming into Perth, for instance, and they have a large brewery there that's everybody drinks their beer, and they said, we know that you are sponsored by Philips, so we're not asking you to do anything to do with sponsorship, but we would like to just welcome you to our town, and we know you're here for a couple of weeks, so every day, if you want to go somewhere, we'll set up facilities for you to have something to eat and to drink, and if you want to go to the beach or wherever, we'll get whatever it is that you guys would like, whether it's a speedboat or windsurfing rigs, whatever. So this is the kind of thing that was going on. There was amazing excitement. I remember coming into Israel, for instance, and we were very popular there too. And then the thing that happened was, in the newspaper there was a cartoon that said that had a guy coming into the Prime Minister's office going, I've got 2 bits of news. The World Bank is giving us an interest-free loan for billions of dollars, and Dire Straits is in town. And the Prime Minister goes, Dire Straits is in town? That's kind of what it was like.
O show do Live Aid foi histórico. Como se viu aquele dia, especialmente com o nascimento do seu filho?
Live Aid for me was a kind of a special day. We were doing a residency next door, doing 14 or 15 shows, I can't remember, at the arena. And so when the request came from Bob Geldof to do Live Aid, we really kind of couldn't do it. They wanted us to be the closing act in London, and we couldn't do it because we had to be playing next door. So the band decided that the latest they could do was like 6 o'clock at night, and then we could still get our equipment back into the hall next door and be ready for our show at like 8:30 or whatever that was. And so it was a little bit more complex than for most bands to do it technically, but we did it, and it was obviously great. The thing with it was, for me, my girlfriend in France was 9 months pregnant, and I had already trained Ed Bicknell, the manager, to play my percussion parts if I was called away during any of the other shows, because you never know when it's going to happen. And but that day, obviously, I could not leave because there was too much going on, and it was too important, these shows. And as it turned out, my son Niels was born in the 20 minutes that we were on stage at Live Aid. Now, we didn't have cell phones yet in those days, of course. And so after we finished our show, I watched a little bit of Queen from the side of the stage, because they were the act after us at Live Aid. And of course that was great, Freddie Mercury in perfect form. And so I watched a little bit of that. And then as I saw that our equipment was leaving on the truck, I went across to the other venue, and I went into the office to make a phone call to the clinic in Biarritz, France, which is where I knew my girlfriend was, and I knew she had her contractions and stuff like that. So I thought it was going to take a lot longer. So I called to see if how it was going, and she says, "Oh, well, it's done. Listen to this." And then I hear this little baby crying, and as she's telling me all of this, and I'm hearing this, the door of the office opened, and Niels Lofgren came in, and I had known Niels from being on the road with him with Neil Young, and so I'm like, "Hey, Niels, yeah, you're playing with us tonight. Great. I'm on the phone here. My son was just born, and we've decided to call him Niels." And he goes, "Oh, don't do that, man." I go, "Why?" He goes, "They always made fun of me when I was a kid." So I said, "You know what? This is 1985. People don't make fun of people's names anymore." Another thing about Live Aid was that the sound on stage was really bad. All you could hear was bass. And it freaked Terry Williams out completely. And he kept calling me over, like, "Man, can we do something? Can we do something?" And I'm trying to play, percussion at the same time. And so you see me on various occasions there, kind of with my hand up in the air, trying to get people's attention to do something for Terry, but they really couldn't. There was just bass everywhere, and there's nothing they could do about it. So that was kind of another distraction for me on that day.
Você pode comentar sobre o show de 70 anos de Nelson Mandela, onde o Dire Straits participou junto com o Eric Clapton?
So we were asked to do Nelson Mandela, and when I say we, I mean the band, obviously. I was on tour with Whitney Houston at the time. We were in Europe touring around. And I got a phone call to see if I would do these shows, like 2 warm-up shows and the Nelson Mandela show that we were headlining. And it was going to be different because Eric Clapton was going to take over from Jack in the role as a rhythm guitarist or whatever, second guitarist. Whichever way that worked out, but rhythm guitarist within that Dire Straits structure. So I said, "Well, I'm on tour, so I can't do any rehearsals with you, but I can come in the day of the first show. If somebody else can make sure everything is set up, then I'll just come in and play those shows, and then do the other show." And Whitney was also playing the Nelson Mandela show, so I'll just pick up the tour there again, and move on. And that's how that came together. On Nelson Mandela's show, I was actually working for 2 bands at that point then. And the next day, I went back out to wherever the hell it was that we were going, and finished up the Whitney Tour.
Por que você deixou de atuar como percussionista na fase final do Dire Straits?
The Nelson Mandela show was also the last show that Terry and I were involved in in playing. I did not do. There was a couple of unofficial little things that the band sort of played at for functions, but nothing to do with touring or anything like that. So when it finally came about that another tour was happening, I actually met Mark at Nebworth, because him and John sat in with the Eric Clapton band, and I was there with the Shadows, with Hank Marvin and Brian Bennett and those guys. And so I ran into him there, and he says, "Oh, you know what? We're thinking of putting a tour together and an album. We're working on an album, and it's all gonna start happening." And I go, "Oh, okay, great." He goes, "Well, put in your request for being a part of it, and we'll consider it." So or words to that effect. I forget what he said exactly. And so I called the office, and they said, yeah, we'll get you to do it. But they didn't tell me yet what the tour was going to be like. And then when it came down to it, of course, they had added more musicians to the roster, and they changed a whole bunch of things, and they wanted to make it this giant tour, and they hired a lot of session guys. And one of the things that they wanted was an well-known percussionist to be set up and to have these impressive-looking drum rigs and stuff. So they did hire me to take care of all of that and to design a percussion rig for Danny Cummings at the time. And so I built him this massive rig, and we did, we made everything look as big and professional as they wanted it to be. And so, but that was the end of me playing, and I never played with them again. Other than, of course, the band never did any sound checks, really. It was all done by the crew. So I would bash around on various percussion instruments for sound check. That's about it.
Após sair da banda, como foi a transição para trabalhar com outros artistas e para trabalhar na TV?
At the end of the last tour, when we finally finished in Zaragoza, Spain, I knew that it was the end of Dire Straits. They would never do anything again. That much was obvious. Mark really didn't want to do it. And it had been a big, massive tour, but it wasn't anywhere near as much fun as some of the other tours had been. It was, it had become very corporate. In fact, also there were accountants on tour and stuff, and they would tell me, "Oh, you have to realize this is now a corporate business." And I'm like, "Really? Not for me." So I figured at the end of that, if I was going to be working for corporate businesses, I might as well work for a real one. So I did a few more tours with people. I toured in '94. I toured with, I did a world tour with Elvis Costello, for instance. And in '95, I was touring with Whitney a little bit, and with the Steve Miller Band. But after that, I started to get invited into doing TV shows. I got invited to work for the David Letterman show, taking care of the bands that would come on their show as part of their music team. And so I did that, and then I started to get invited to other TV shows like the Rosie O'Donnell show. That was a live show with music every day. And I did Saturday Night Live, those shows. I did a whole bunch of them, and whatever else was going on.
Quais foram os projetos mais marcantes que você realizou fora do Dire Straits?
Other tours that I worked on, I've mentioned, that I've worked with Elvis Costello and with Squeeze and with Whitney Houston, but I also toured with all kinds of other bands, the Louis Bellson Orchestra, some cabaret acts like Chai Lights and the Drifters and the New Seekers, and I did several tours with the Shadows, which was great. I liked working with Brian Bennett, the drummer, great drummer. And I did Van Halen's first world tour, and I did all kinds of different tours, really, for a period of about 20 years.
Joop, como você vê a importância do Dire Straits na história da música?
I think Dire Straits is a very important band within the history of music, because, first of all, when they started, everything in England was all about, high energy, new wave, punk rock, all of that. And they were very, very different. And they became huge despite all of that. And they've made some great albums that have stood the test of time. There's a bunch of music there that will be around for a long time to come. So I think that's something to bear in mind, is that they are really an important band that was recognized not just by the fans but by other musicians as well. There's been a lot of collaborations. Mark has been invited to be a part of all kinds of different things. He's written songs for all kinds of different artists. So, and obviously he's had his own solo career after that, doing very different music, really, from what Dire Straits was all about.
Você ainda mantém contato com membros da banda ou da equipe?
So, with the technology of today, social media and things, it's become much easier to be in touch with everybody. I have done so many tours where, you're on tour for a year with people and you do everything together. You're traveling together, you're playing together, you're eating together, you're experiencing different cities, you're meeting people. It's a whole life that you really share in a very intense way. And then all of a sudden, it's over. It's the last show, and you go home, and you know that you may never see some of these people again. And that's the way that was. And now, with social media, of course, that's not true anymore. I'm in touch with all kinds of people from back in those days. Ron Eve is one of them, for instance, and I'm in touch now with Pick and his wife Linda, and I'm in touch with Pab, who was the sound engineer. He was the assistant sound engineer, really, on some of the tours, but he's now the main sound engineer for Paul McCartney, and he does AC/DC, and so I'm in touch with all these people on a regular basis, and that's really been fun for me to be able to do that. And it's also through social media that a lot of the fans have reached me and have reminded me of that whole period. Because you know what? It's a long time ago. It was in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, if you want to count that part of it for me. But you know, it was not something that I thought about all that often. I've had busy careers my whole life. After doing music for so long, I wanted to do something else, and so I joined NBC News as a sound engineer, and I traveled around the world getting news stories. It was I did things like, you know, every natural disaster. So I went to earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic eruptions and all kinds of disaster zones, floods, you name it. And also, like, important political events. I would go to all kinds of conventions and rallies and things like that. I did tons of interviews with heads of state and all kinds of movie stars, and I got called away to things like, for instance, when Osama bin Laden was shot in Pakistan, they sent me to his house the next day. I went to his compound, and I was there for about 5 days or so, I guess.
Se você tivesse a oportunidade, você voltaria a trabalhar com Dire Straits numa reunião especial?
You know, that's not something that's going to happen. Not everybody gets along all that great. I don't really know. But for all these people that have been involved in Dire Straits, somehow to get together and everybody play a little bit, that is just never going to happen.
Que conselho você daria para quem quer trabalhar nos bastidores da música, como técnico ou hold?
I'm not sure how to answer that. It is, you have to have a certain amount of dedication. You have to realize that whatever it is that you do for a band, you have to do it 100%. Every detail is important. When I just did drums, for instance, everything about that was totally cleaned and polished and tuned and kept in optimal working order all the time. There was not a fingerprint on these drum kits that I worked on. Not even a fingerprint. I would work with them. I would wear white cotton gloves that are normally used for handling photographs, and that's how I would work. And I would get a new pair every day just to have it as clean as possible. So there's a certain intensity that you have to have, and that is true in every line of work associated with artists. If you just want to treat it as a job, then it's not for you. It's not a job. It's a life.
Como você gostaria de ser lembrado dentro da história do Dire Straits?
In the history of Dire Straits, mine was just a small role. Yes, I introduced the band, and yes, I played percussion. Yes, I did all kinds of other things. But people don't necessarily remember me. In most cases, they never saw me. They only heard me because, you know, I was playing, but they wouldn't even have necessarily known that there was somebody doing that. You know, people don't pay that much attention, is what I always thought to myself. Now I'm getting a lot of contact with fans from around the world, and that's really fun for me. But how people remember me, I don't know.
The same tuning, you know?
Yeah.
The feeling of the tuning.